Welcome to the Modernize or Die Podcast, CFML News Edition, where we keep you up to date with everything going on in the Cold Fusion community. We'll share the latest news on events, releases to engines, frameworks, libraries, and tools, as well as spotlighting quality content from the community. Welcome to the Modernize or Die Podcast, CFML News Edition. It's up to episode 137, and it's March 1st. White rabbits, or whatever you're supposed to say. Do you guys do that here in America?
I haven't heard of that before. What is the white rabbits? What is that?
My mom would always wake up on the first day of the month. You meant to say white rabbits before you say anything else. Good luck, apparently, or something. I don't know.
Well, I have an Alice in Wonderland theme, but we'll go with it.
Yep. Maybe my mom's just crazy. We haven't decided on that one yet.
I think everyone has that. The jury's still out.
Yeah, but my book's longer than your book.
Fair enough.
Well, I'm Gavin Pickin, Senior Developer for Ortus Solutions, and I'm along with Dan Card, another Senior Developer for Ortus Solutions. So, first up, let's thank our sponsors, Ortus Solutions, the makers of CommandBox, CommandBox, FORGEBOX, TestBox, and lots of other boxes.
Yeah, there's a couple ways you can do that. One is basically subscribe to the Ortus podcast that we have here. We're there every week. As Gavin mentioned, we're at episode 137. Like and subscribe to videos on YouTube. We also are looking kind of a push to see if we can get our repo started on GitHub. There's a new box or a new module that's out there for CommandBox. It's CommandBox-GitHub. And basically what it does is it goes through and it checks all the dependencies in whenever you have a project and stars them on your behalf at the Ortus site. So that would be a really big help if people could do that. Other than that, we have the podcast, free or paid accounts on CFCasts. We have the Ortus books, including the 102 ColdBox HMVC quick tips and tricks. That's available on Gumroad, which is gum.co, ColdBox-tips.
Yep, and we'll get that in the show notes and the chat for those watching live on YouTube. So the other way we're able to put on this podcast is through our Patreon supporters. We've got 36 awesome Patreons providing 97% of the funding for this podcast. So that means Ortus has more money for all the other things that Ortus does in the community. And so we really appreciate all those supporters. We'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of the show. But let's get into our news and events. And we're actually pretty light on news, but we're going to go over a few of the things you might have missed from last week or the week before. So what do we got first?
Well, in case you missed it, Lucee 5.3.9.8, release candidate 1, it was released. Now, in the shorthand, that basically means that that with the advent of that, 5.3.9, that CommandBox now is completely 100% free of the Log4j 1x. As you guys remember, a couple months ago, it was found that had an X point. We actually couldn't reproduce it in Cold Fusion, which was nice, but this is good to know that that isn't in there at all. So basically, if you see that, download it, test it, make InfoSec happy, and let us know how it goes.
Yep, so CommandBox 5.5.0 Alpha has that 539 as the base build.
So would have been good to say was the actual version. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. Yep, and like I said, I'm not sure if it's it might almost be released. I hadn't seen anything from Brad about it yet, so we're probably still alpha testing. So if you get a chance, let us know if you get any issues, obviously. I would hope to get that released out soon. Okay, we also had Brad Wood again last week. He had his Ortus webinar for February. He talked about what was new in CommandBox 5.x. So we went over all the different things and showed you a great way to actually see that for yourself in the release notes. Brad has great release notes in the Ortus Books website for CommandBox, so you can go through that. And we have the video up on CFCasts, so we'll be sharing that with you guys shortly as well. We also had the first CFUG meetup in Hawaii last week, but I believe there was actually some issue and there was a last-minute cancellation due to some technical difficulties. So hopefully we can get that one rescheduled. I know they've got one already scheduled for March, so that one's coming up. But good to see this Hawaii CFUG is up and running, and hopefully they get smoother stuff for the next few.
I guess I had a couple posts this last week up on Facebook, which was good. The Hawaii Cold Fusion that I remember. Mm-hmm. Okay, also in the In Case You Missed It category, last week, or actually I guess last Thursday, Mark Takata did a presentation on using Cold Fusion and Adobe PDF to do reports from cloud-based no-code data sources, stuff like Google Sheets, and how to generate PDF-based reports from there. The link is actually up on the link. Gavin will put it in the chat. There's the register button was grayed out. We saw that, but hopefully they'll be putting that content up on either the YouTube channel or up on their webinar page.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, so hopefully we'll see that here soon. So, okay, Adobe workshops. Join the Adobe Cold Fusion workshop to learn about how you can leverage Cold Fusion. It's great for beginners and maybe even older developers that just want to touch up. Right now we have one scheduled in March, and it's going to be by Damien Bruendonks, and that's going to be in the Central European Time, 9 a.m. Central European Time on March 9th. The website allows you to register for free, so it's a great one, and we have a few more coming up here in the next few months, so he's got plenty coming if you can't make this one. And hopefully we'll get a few more in the American time zones. Brian Sappi taught the last one.
For a list of all those, especially ones that are coming up in the near future, they have them scheduled out, I believe, all the way through May. The link is actually in the chat, but it's meetus.adobeevents.com/coldfusion.
Perfect. Okay. So next up, we'll talk about CFCasts. So CFCast.com is our video training resource. We have free and paid content available. And last week, we just released another free video, which was the webinar for Ortus for February. And that was Brad talking about what's new in CommandBox 5. So that is available up on CFCasts. I know we have a few more series we're working on. I'm trying to get one of my series underway too. So we'll have lots more great content coming to you soon for CFCasts. Okay, next up, we have some conferences and training.
Sorry, Gavin. Sorry about that. A lot of conferences and training coming up. For example, DevNexus is coming up. It's the largest JavaScript conference in the U.S. April 12th through 14th. It's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. Brad Wood and Luis Mahana will be speaking from Ortus. Luis is speaking on Alpine JS. It's called Alpine JS Declare and React with Simplicity. Brad speaking on getting more involved with open source projects. So he's talking about what is a pull request and how do you contribute. And all of that can be seen at the devnexus.com website, which, with my newfound power to paste into the chat, sheet of links is there as well.
Perfect. And I think you said JavaScript is actually Java, but Luis
Did I say JavaScript?
Yeah, Luis is actually talking about JavaScript, so
right.
It's one of those things. So yeah, basically big conference. Next up, we also have DockerCon. So May 10th, we're going to have the free online virtual conference for DockerCon. And they'll have all the usual, so that product demos, breakout sessions, technical sessions. They'll have stuff from their partners, experts, captains, community, and everybody else. So there's a lot of great stuff in there. Be to them in person before. They're great conferences. So DockerCon, docker.com/DockerCon, and you can check that out. It's a great conference. So if you're looking at Docker or something like that, definitely want to go to that one. Okay, what else we have?
Well, coming up in June, just to contrast that, we said DevNexus was a Java conference. Just wanted to make sure. This is now a JavaScript conference. It's Vue.js, the US Vue.js conference. It's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, June 8th through the 10th, 2022. And the slogan is Beach Code Vue. I'm going to guess it's actually going to go probably in that order. But the workshop day is then on June 8th. The main conference is on the 9th and 10th. The call for papers did close yesterday. So we had a great idea for a talk. Wait till next year, but definitely go. It's at us.vuejs.org.
Yep, I'm really hoping I can get to that one. Fingers crossed and all that. We also have Into the Box tentative dates, so September 27th through the 30th for Into the Box in Houston. We're still confirming the venue, so once we know that, we'll be able to plan a little better. Into the Box Latam is still planned for December 1st and 2nd in 2022, so that's later in the year. We haven't seen anything from Adobe yet to see if they're going to do CF Summit in person or online again. We'll find out and let you know as soon as we do.
And if you need more conferences after that, they're the great website to go for that. Huge list of conferences for almost any topic, any language is confs.tech, confs.tech. And also in the chat.
Cool. Okay. Let's talk about some blogs, tweets, and videos of the week. And Vil, who's actually in the chat, is our first one. So Vil is actually talking about Logbox, Track Your Database Changes, Part 2. So he's really diving into some of this content. He's been talking about quick a little bit in ORM and everything else. And so this one's a good one, basically. He breaks down ORM Hibernate, and as he mentions, it's like Hibernate doesn't have the best reputation, and maybe he thinks it's not well deserved. So, Hibernate is obviously the ORM that ColdFusion and Lucee both have, and you're right, Will. It does have a bad reputation, and one of the reasons he mentioned was error messages are hard to understand. And he says, well, quicker really they can be hard to understand too if you're not the not the one who wrote it. But yeah, so ORM has had some issues, and I know one of the biggest issues is the change of versions between, Lucee had one version, CF had another version, and another version of ColdFusion had this and that, and some of them were old and some of them are new, and so we had all sorts of fun with ORM. Lucee, not a lot of people on Lucee were using ORM, so it did not get as much love as it needed, and so as I think Vil said here, it took them a few years to fix 3 lines of code when he moved from Lucee 4 to 5 to fix his ORM bugs. So, yeah, but it's a really good blog post. He goes through sort of comparing, how to get things set up with ORM and event handling and with ColdFusion. And so he walks through all of that, all the steps you need, compares and contrasts with Quick as well a little bit, so you can see. But there's a really good blog post. So if you're looking at ORM or deciding if you want Quick or ORM, that's a good blog post for that. And as he mentions, you can still track your database even if you're not using either of those with some extra creativity. And he's going to blog about that in the future. So that's really cool. So I like seeing that. I've used Quick and ORM. There's definitely pros and cons to both of them. There's certain things that are just really sharp in both of them, but yeah, so read that, learn a bit more, and figure out which one you want to use.
Makes sense. Yeah, those projects that are like they're going to be monumental, and they're like 2 lines. Like, oh, if I'd known that, I would have done it like a year and a half ago when I first thought of it.
Yep.
Which, so the next blog we have is from Ben Adele, upgrading my ColdFusion blog from MySQL 5.7.10 to MySQL 8.0.28. I always get lost in those version codes. Basically, from MySQL 5 to MySQL 8. The jump is huge. The pain is real, people. But this is actually a really cool blog post. I was just skimming through it and kind of wish that I had read this about 2 years ago when I tried doing this. And bailed on it and actually reverted everything back to 5.0 because it was a pain. But it goes through and talks about the steps that he took to clean up the connection source. He has a whole list of things that he actually goes through and talks about how he actually created it from the connection strings and everything else. So if you use MySQL and you are thinking about doing the upgrade, which obviously eventually has to happen, I would recommend skimming through this because it actually was a really, really good source of material. What's interesting about this, I learned this during the upgrade, is just how the different databases, this is going to sound kind of dumb, but for example, in Microsoft SQL Server, I was always used to just having multiple SQL strings concatenated in the same call with separated by a semicolon. Evidently, that's a thing in MySQL that you have to actually turn on. So I couldn't figure out why this entire sections of a website wasn't working when we changed databases. And I'm like, this is basic SQL. Turns out it wasn't as basic as I thought. Anyway, random thoughts.
Yeah, I know that they had a feature in ColdFusion where you had to enable it for security and everything too, so people wouldn't basically be able to add some SQL injection on the end of your thing, put a semicolon, drop database type stuff, and so that was just an extra security feature they added. But
yeah, it made perfect sense. I just wasn't ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. When you don't know, then boom.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, next up, we have one from Matthew Clemente, and so this one talks about an approach to using Hyper, QB, Logbox, and other ColdBox modules with Framework 1. And this is something, as he mentions, that Tony Junkies over the years blogged quite a bit about using ColdBox modules within Framework 1. And Matthew said that he ended up doing something slightly different than what Tony did, so he thought it'd be worth documenting. So this is a request we get quite often is, how can we use our, your ColdBox modules in Framework 1? And we're like, you can. A lot of them are actually standalone, like Logbox is a standalone library. But in this blog post you'll see, basically, ColdBox does a lot of things for you when you use these modules. There's conventions that basically set things up, wire things up, and everything. And so if you're going to use them outside of ColdBox, you just have to do that work yourself. It doesn't mean you can't use them. A lot of them you can use pretty easily too. And this blog post is a great reference if you're looking to do that. But you'll see what CommandBox is doing under the covers to get it to work, because you have to do it manually in here. And so, he set up some subsystems with Hyper and Logbox and QB, and he talks about why he doesn't like using subsystems for modules. And so this is really good if you're new to Framework 1 or haven't used the CommandBox module. This is a great read. He also does link to several of Tony's blog posts here, which are really important too. So it's a great blog post, and I'm glad that he got the stuff working and everything. And he even put a little example GitHub repo app out there for you guys. So that's a great share. So thanks very much, Matthew, for doing that.
Awesome. Cool. All right, continue on with some of the Adobe stuff. Mark Takata has a blog series. This was called Building a Data Import Workflow Using Cloud Data Sources and CFML. Well, first I read that and I'm like, well, why would it be different than just a regular data source? It just points to a cloud source versus just a regular database. When I opened it up, he's actually talking about a library that I had never heard of, but sounded really pretty cool, called htmx.org. And what it allows you to do is actually make AJAX calls from an aspect of the DOM. So for example, you build your HTML page, and instead of having to wire up with AJAX calls or another JavaScript framework, htmx.org actually allows you to write some of the calls right in your HTML. It makes you put the verb right in there. It makes the call, comes back, and then fills in that DOM element with what it got back from the call, which was kind of a cool thing. And I'd never heard of that before. So what he's talking about is how to actually make calls, I think 2 Cold Fusion pages. And then he brings up the example of either calling a CFM. Yeah, he actually calls a CFM post or CFM page with a post call, and does some other stuff in there, which I thought was interesting. There seems to be a real push to kind of have like pre-compiled HTML returning back to the browser recently. That's what
I know. It's funny, right? Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it does. Like in the old days, guess what? You had a server that gave you HTML. It's Cold Fusion. Right. And then you had HTML in the front that would go and get HTML, and then you'd go and get JSON and then inflate the HTML in the front because you didn't want to send so much over the wire. But yeah, it's kind of like, cycles. There's always cycles, and they just, trying to streamline processes and make things more reactive. But in the end, it's like server-side rendered stuff is basically old school. Let's build it on the server, and they would just make it easy to hydrate. And yeah, that was pretty funny.
I was thinking about reading that, because this guy I was going off. He's like, it's a fully functional, completely wireless, random access, listen to music wherever you want. And this old guy next to me says, yes, it was called the radio when I was little.
Yeah.
But, that works.
Yep. Charlie shared us something on the Adobe portal as well. So he talked about how Cold Fusion's download page moved into the docs, and the JVM download UI is being tweaked too. So you'll see that when you go to download Adobe Cold Fusion, you can also pick the different installers for the JDKs and everything. So, nice little setup there. So, again, thanks Charlie for keeping us up to date on all these things, because sometimes you can rack your brain trying to figure out where they put stuff. So,
very true. So I'm looking here in the show notes, and I had highlighted an article that I wanted to talk about. And I think I missed, because then the one that I have no idea what he's talking about is the one that's highlighted now. So again, from Ben Liddell, he talks about embedding encryption key version within the encrypted payload in Lucee. Now, the gist I got from this, and Gavin, help me out a little bit here, but the gist I got basically is almost making the hash self-documenting. Is that kind of the way to look at it?
Because we actually talked about the earlier post last week, and so he was basically talking about how he used to have a database migration that would add an extra column. It would store the information about the algorithm, and then you'd basically go through the database, processing each of the fields and storing the hash and the salt and all those types of things, and then he'd have to go remove them once he's done with the migration. He's like, all that work, and I could have just put it inside the the encryption key like bcrypt does, for example, and there's a lot of other ones that do it as well. And so, he talked about how he wanted to obviously abstract that a little bit. So there was like an ID that represented a certain format. That way he wasn't actually putting the algorithm and the encrypted, and the version and all that information publicly visible. But he wanted to store a key of the encryption type and put that in his payload. And so this is him actually trying to get a proof of concept working, I think.
Gotcha. Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I skimmed it, and I was like, I'm not sure I quite get it, but at the same time, it looks really cool, and it probably is very applicable to my life. So one of these days, I'll understand it.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things, a lot of times we use other tools that are already pre-made. Ben likes to to build on top of that. And yeah, I mean, he already had a system, and so this is just, extending that with the keys. And so very cool.
Makes sense.
Yep. So next up we have another one from Ben. And so this one is talking about installing Fusion Reactor. And we love Fusion Reactor over here at Ortus. And as soon as he installed it, he found a huge oversight in his Cold Fusion queries. I think it's a bit of a trick question because he asked you if you can figure it out. So for those watching, I'll scroll down and we'll see if we can get this picture any bigger. But he was basically talking about it and, looking through, do you notice anything wrong with it? And I was like, what am I supposed to be looking for?
Right.
But yeah, basically, what he was referring to is he has this debug method that he likes to put in all his queries so you know where it came from. And so basically in your query itself, he would have this comment, and that comment would have a debug, and it would tell you how it got to it. So partials.blog post gateway.get all active posts, for example. So that way inside Fusion Reactor whatnot, you'll be able to see that query came from a certain location really easily. And so it makes it easier for you to figure out. And so that blog post talked about that and why he did it and how he's using string concatenation and everything else. Yeah, basically it's pretty cool.
It is. I like this. I love self-documenting stuff because, like, you look at the Fusion Reactor log, you have no idea what query that is unless you actually have your entire code base memorized. Which some people do. And God bless them. That's awesome. I am not one of them. But I thought this was neat. And what's interesting about this too is sorry, this was just kind of a bigger topic this last week, where we're having a conversation about how is an error going to work? Because if you have an error that blows up and you're using a tool in real time, you can see the error and it blows up. But if you're doing something headless, where does the error message actually go? So stuff like this I thought was fascinating, where it can actually help you, if you are running something headless, you can actually just see where everything is, in addition to being able to just kind of analyze the calls and everything else. So I learned that about SQL. This is a very educational show. I learned a lot.
Yeah. And I love the way Sentry works too. We've been using Sentry for quite a while for our logging and everything. And so even when you're having an API and you catch, an error message and you return a nice API error message, it's still good to be able to send the error that you caught out to Sentry or whatnot so you know it's there. But that's the other thing too. I actually was debugging yesterday and found all these errors, and I was going through it, and then I realized, I actually caught that. I handled it. I'm logging it so I can do something with it. I'm like, I need to make sure that I track that differently. So I need to add a tag to it saying, it was a handled exception, but doesn't mean we don't want to know about it. So there's some interesting things like that.
I love when you build something in, you're like, this is a great idea that I put in here. And then you forget that you did it. You're like, oh, I was brilliant when I did that. I did nothing with the information, but that was a really good thing for me to put that in there.
Exactly. So what do we got next?
All right. So again, going with our Ben Adele theme, pretty much this section is pretty much Ben. Couple things. I wish Ben and Luis and a couple of people would get together and just put on a seminar on how we actually create amazing companies and make all these blog posts at the same time. I'm like, I don't understand just the complete volume and quality of content that comes out. I did a blog post 2 years ago and I was very proud of myself and haven't done one since. So every 2 years, like clockwork. This was a cool topic, I thought, which was neat. So the topic is irrational guilt over using order by with the ID column in a Cold Fusion SQL query. And the point here is that he's going through and saying, what's the best way to actually do? So, sorry, the blog was actually a combination of two things. It was a technical blog talking about how orders and how databases come up with their plan for doing the actual query, which not coming from a really strong, I know SQL and stuff, but I never thought about how the database actually does all the query and what the plan of it was until recently when a guy on one of my teams was talking about it. I'm like, oh, to me it was just black magic. You just asked a question and the data came back, but there's this whole back end to it. What Ben's talking about here basically is how he was able to actually kind of sort of figure out from a performance point of view. He talked about basically in a given database that he had or table that he had, the ID was an auto increment number and the create at date was the auto increment date. And he was talking about the performance issues in terms of ordering by the ID, which was a number and indexed and everything else, versus ordering by the date, whatever. And he was deciding that he was ordering it by the ID, since it was basically the same thing, since each one of those things was going up, never backwards, only up, or something. So it was the same thing. And he was having like this internal conflict between that isn't the right way to do it. And he basically said that's a stupid way to look at things, because it works, it's real, it's valid. It may not be the right way to do things in a purely point of view. But he said that it made sense. And sometimes we drive ourselves nuts going in, backing ourselves in a corner, trying to do things from an ideal theoretical point of view versus something that actually is valid and real and practical and probably better in terms of performance and stuff. As someone that kind of wrestles with that sometimes, like, is this the right way to do this or not? I kind of appreciated this in addition to the technical aspects of how the plan worked. So that was something to check out, I think.
I know, and then don't forget, don't just stop when you get to the bottom, the bottom of the article, because down here, someone asked about why not just create an index on the created column, right? That's something he didn't mention in the blog post, but here he's talking about why you would do that and how indexes are not free, and so he explains even that, and so that's a blog post for some people. That's his comment response there, So again, really, really detailed, and as Vil said, it takes me hours to write only one. I don't know how fast he can write that fast, but that's it's basically one of those things, So
these two fingers only go so quick.
I know, I gotta figure out how to use my third and fourth finger when I'm typing, and I might double my efficiency, right?
Exactly. It's all about the metrics.
Yep, exactly. So, well, that wraps up our blogs, tweets, and videos of the week. Lots of great content out there, guys. So, worth keeping up on for sure. But next up, let's talk about Find a Job, and we've got looks like 5 new jobs listed on CFMLjobs.com. I've seen a few floating over the Tweeterverse this week. So what do we got?
So we've got a couple things. First one up here is actually up here in Boston. So if you've never been to Boston, come visit. It's a great place. More fun anyway. It's good. I lived here for a while. I enjoyed it. But it's a company, basically, they're looking for a senior developer. They put the name of the company in here. It was, of course, now I've forgotten it. Oh my goodness, what's going on? Anyway, basically, it's Boston. It is remote, so you don't have to move to Boston if you don't want to, because it does get cold. But they're looking for a senior developer, Fusion Metro experience, MySQL. Maybe you can read Ben's post and help them upgrade to version 8. A couple years of Cold Fusion and Lucee experience, and then some stuff with REST. So definitely check that out. There's some other ones that are happening in Overland, Kansas. There's a couple companies. There's one up in Ottawa, Ontario. In Montreal, also, evidently Canada is open for Cold Fusion recently. The one that was in Montreal, I think, was for one of the phone companies or something like that. And the one that was in Ontario, in Ottawa, which I was informed, I believe, is the capital of Canada. I was looking for a Cold Fusion and JavaScript fixed term contract to freelancer. It's a short 3-month contract, so if you're looking to fill some time, by all means contact them. And it was Moray Solutions was the name of the company. Anyway, so 5 new jobs. Go check out CFML job or getcfmljobs.com, and all those things will be on there. A couple of the job links you can do. Ortus Solutions, About Us, Careers. We'll put that up in the chat as well.
Yep, and we have a couple of jobs posted in there. We got one in the American time zones, and we also have one for our LATAM. I think RIB developers. I always have to try and translate this in my head. So developer of web in the El Salvador team. So we got a couple of jobs there. We're pretty much always looking. We're always growing our team. The Ortus team's getting bigger and bigger. We almost need like another room at the conference just for all the Ortus attendees to join the Ortus members. A lot of good content, a lot of great job opportunities in the CFML world. So go look at some, and if you're looking for a job, plenty of options. So remember, getcfmljobs.com, and then they do scrape from most of the big providers. And if you've got a job that you'd like to post, let us know. I did get one from Daniel Fredericks, and I forgot to put it in the notes. I just remembered it right now. So I'll try and add it to the show notes when I post them. Sorry about that, but yeah, we'll get that one out as well. Okay. So next up, we have our FORGEBOX module of the week, And this one actually links back to something we talked about earlier, the Log4j. So this is one that Brad worked on. Originally, he did a Log4j scanner, and that would help look at your code and look for different things. And what Brad has done is actually released a new version. This is based on this github.com/white source Log4j detect distribution. So apparently it works a lot better than the previous version or the previous provider that he used. So this is a Log4j detect project. It's native Go binary, and basically it'll scan folder jars for vulnerable files. So it works pretty well, pretty easy as well. The commands are pretty simple, and it spits out a really nice little list there and tells you what you have and what might be a vulnerability or not. So it's pretty cool. Brad was tweeting about it a little bit this week, so if you look at Brad's tweets, you'll find out a little bit more. But that's up on FORGEBOX. So CommandBox-log4j-detect.
The link is there in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, so cool little module just to make sure you're clean and clear and nothing else is lingering. Get that and run that and make sure you're safe.
All right, moving on to the VS Code hits, tips, and tricks of the week. We have this week as icon fonts for VS Code. It's basically snippets for popular icon fonts such as Font Awesome, Ionicons, Glyphicons, Octicons, Material Design Icons, and a lot more. And it's basically just designed to be able to put all those things in your code.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because it actually will complete the snippet for you too. So if it's, if you're using Font Awesome, it wraps in the I tag. If you're using like a glyph icon, it knows to put in a span. So it knows how to do it, and it's just kind of nice. We're using some updates. CommandBox 5 has a new version of Font Awesome, so some of our icons weren't working, and this type of module is just great for that to help you find the right one. So pretty cool.
That for emojis. I think it's really cool when people have like the right emoji or anything else in the chat. I always spend like 3 hours looking through. How did they find that one so quickly?
Yeah, I know. They're just emoji.
I know that's not really the same thing, but it struck me similar. Sorry.
No, I feel you. But so if you go check that out, it's up on the marketplace.visualstudio.com, and it's the icon fonts.
There we go.
Next up, we have our Patreon supporters. So thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. They individually, personally sponsor our open source initiatives to ensure the great tools like CommandBox, ForgeBox, CodeBox, ContentBox, TestBox, and almost every other box that we make out there gets supported. And this podcast is one of those products. I know that the cost of cloud infrastructure alone just for ForgeBox and package management with CommandBox, of all that free space that you're getting now is on the free accounts, like that all adds up. And so we're really thankful that they can, support us in this podcast, and that gives Ortus more funds to be able to spread out through those other projects. So we appreciate you.
And the way that you can do that, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/OrtusSolutions. Don't forget, we have annual memberships. We basically get a discount on your generosity. Pay for the year and get a save 10%, which is really kind of handy if you're in a business and you need a budget for a certain thing. There's also different packages, bronze packages and up. Now that a ForgeBox Pro account, as well as a CFCast subscription. As a perk, as a thank you. All Patreon supporters get to have a profile badge on the community website, on the Ortus community website. And all Patreon supporters have their own private forum access on the community website, just for Patreon supporters, as a way to maybe get some help a little quicker than you would be in the already helpful Slack channels and everything else. This is just kind of as a thank you for support of the company. By the way, that's also a quick plug for our community. It's community.ortussolutions.com. And that's kind of where we're moving a lot of conversations and chat and that kind of stuff. Not away from Slack. I meant from like the Google groups a long time ago. Anyway, Gavin, are you doing the names or should I do the names this week?
I will do the names. I was just trying to see if I could find that email about the job real quick to be able to throw in here.
Gotcha.
But I couldn't find it in time. So
in that case, I will do a quick soft shoe and sing. No, I will not do that while Gavin's looking for the post.
No, it's fine. I'll add it later. I'm sorry, Dan. He did email to me, and so I should have got that out. But anyway, it'll be in the show notes, and we'll probably cover it next week if it's still available. So, our Patreons, thank you to each and every one of you. John Wilson from Synaptrix, Eric Hoffman, Gary Knight, Mario Rodriguez, Giancarlo Gomez, David Bellinger, Dan Card, Jonathan Perrett, Jeffrey McGee from Sunstar Media 6, Dean Maunder, Joseph Lamery, Don Bellamy, Jan Yannick, Laxma Terahadi, Calvin Stanton, Jeremy Adams, Didier Lesnicki, Matthew Clemente, Daniel Garcia, Scott Steinbeck from AgriTracking Systems. He's in the chat too, so sorry about that. Ben Nadal, Brett Deline, Kai Koenig, Charlie Earhart, Jonas Eriksson, Jason Dager, Sean Oden, Matthew Darby, Ross Phillips, Edgardo Cabezas, Patrick Flynn, Steffi Mungi, John Wish, Kevin Wright, and Peter Ameri. So we got a lot of great people there, and we want to say thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us. It is appreciated.
Just think, you could be on that list as well, next to those illustrious names, by being a Patreon supporter. You can always see an updated list of all the sponsors on the Ortus Solutions website, which is ortussolutions.com. If you go to the About Us/sponsors page, and there it is, you'll be able to check out who's on there, say thank you, join them, like I said, and there we go.
Yeah,
that's our plug.
Scott said I'm the first person to ever mess up his name. I blame the lack of morning drinks. I should have drank some more water before I started talking today. Anyways, well, thanks everybody for joining us. Episode 137 is in the can. So I know Will's like, you should try my last name. It's like, I know I mess it up all the time. I even say Will wrong. I say, instead of saying Will, I say Will. I know you've explained it to me like a lot of times. So anyway, we appreciate all of you. Thanks for everyone joining us in the chat, and we'll catch you all next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
Bye. Show notes for this episode can be found at cfmlnews.modernizeordie.io, where you can also subscribe to your favorite podcast player like Spotify or iTunes. We also have the link to YouTube to find more videos just like this. The music used in this podcast is under a royalty-free license from Sound.com and Blue Tree Audio.